We're rolling.
Welcome to the House Dudes podcast, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Jack Haas.
And I'm Josh Koth. Here at House Dudes, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
Well, we have Brian T. Bradley on the line. And Brian, I warned you ahead of time. I always throw it to the person to kind of do a self-introduction. So I leave the floor to you right off the bat.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm an asset protection attorney, and I just want to start off with saying thanks for, having me on and putting this podcast together. Asset protection really is a confusing topic, but it's really a necessary one, especially for your listeners who are looking at investing or starting to invest in real estate and cash flowing property. And I hope I can add some value or at least get them thinking. And so, I'm super, lawyer rising star, selected to the, attorney of recognition list and top 100 litigators list. So, I know what I'm talking about, and I like to pass down, information and education to people who are looking to start investing or already are investing, and how to manage their risk and their liability a little bit better. And so I got into asset protection from the litigation side of the law and having people sued or having to sue people and their lives just being turned completely upside down with having a false sense of security that, I have insurance, they're going to cover me no matter what, or I have this revocable living trust and this is supposed to protect me, which they're not designed to do. And the next thing you know, they're coming into my door, just their lives turned upside down and looking for help. And I wanted to get ahead of that and be a little bit more proactive with clients. And so what I do is more advanced estate planning and strategic planning, focusing on setting up systems and teams for clients that have essentially outgrown the basic LLC setup that we would start with investors. Mm-hmm. And because eventually there's going to be a point when they outgrow that. And then we try to keep in mind the overall goal of, what asset protection really is about. It's really about lifestyle preservation, peace of mind, and then changing the way predators are going to view you. You don't want to be viewed as an asset-rich target or mark, but as, asset poor or someone that's you're not able to get money out of. And as long as you start working within their system and your team, you're also able to add value and get an actual return on an investment with the systems we set up.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, when it comes to asset protection, I always find this interesting. It seems like a lot of people kind of default to whatever we're told. It's almost like insurance to a certain. Then we don't really ever take a look at our insurance policy to the depth that we need to. So I almost call it like maybe protection versus full protection.
I almost feel like you stole it from me, because that's exactly what you say most people have, as we distinguish between maybe protection and full protection, or just these false sense of securities. It's totally true.
Sure. So what can you tell us a little bit about that difference? Like how do you get people's mindset changed to think into that full protection realm?
Well, I think it's just going through some of the misconceptions that we have. Like we can start with kind of what is insurance. We can jump into a little bit about, the misconceptions of that. LLCs are great starting points, but there's weaknesses to that. Those are maybe protections. And then how do we get into what's an exemption for full protection? And then how do you pick strong jurisdictions versus weak jurisdictions? And I think once we conceptually build this pie, your listeners would be able to understand and think about the differences and how they apply to themselves.
Well, if you could point out like one or two big items that would push. What would push somebody out of an LLC, for example? They've outgrown an LLC. What are some of those defining factors that would push them into? What is it question. Is it like an S corp or something? Would that be the next step, or what?
No, because especially if you're investing in real estate, it's generally better to use an LLC to begin with, and then you can decide and identify how you choose to be taxed with your CPA, and they just file a form to the IRS that says, "Hey, tax me like this," which a lot of people forget to do. They forget to identify how they want to be taxed. But so some of the limits of an LLC is like in the name, it says limited. So you only have a limited amount of personal liability protection. And it's going to vary a lot state by state on what, judgment rights you're going to have and protection that you're going to have. And they're really easy to pierce. There's something that's called piercing the corporate veil. And a lot of people just mismanage their LLCs and they commingle accounts. They don't keep their accounting in order. And once you're pierced, all the equity and all the assets that are in there are available for a judgment to be claimed upon. And so the other part of the weakness here is that once you get to about $1 million, $3 million, if you have everything stuck in one LLC, you've outgrown the protection of that LLC for the reasons we've kind of been talking about, piercing the corporate veil, all the equity that's in there. So the next thing that you'd either do is create another LLC and separate the assets out. Then you're going to keep growing, add another LLC, separate the assets out. That's just going to become really expensive and hard to manage. And so as you start outgrowing this with a higher net worth, there's different systems to use that protects you even better through legal rights or just non-statutory recognition of judgments. And that also actually adds a return on an investment by working with more team members. So you're paying more, but you're getting more in return and that higher protection.
Sure.
But I would say for those, starting out, LLCs are a great place to start. You shouldn't own something in your own name. So don't think I'm scaring you away from setting up an LLC. I'm not. I just would say know the limitations and know the role. They're going to be cheaper to start. They're going to be easier to maintain. The protection is going to be limited. Like I said, and charging orders are going to be different from state to state. And what a charging order means is, it's how much a creditor can collect from you, the member owner of an LLC. And there's some states that have good charging orders, and there's most states that have very poor charging orders. And so that's what that's why people jurisdiction shop for LLCs.
Sure. Well, I'm going to change the topic slightly on you then, because one of the things that we have noticed, at least when we're pulling our marketing lists lately, I've noticed a lot more people holding property in trusts. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what your thought on that is, and if that's a good strategy.
I really like owning properties in trust. It's just a matter of picking the right jurisdictions to put them in. And so if we want to break down, I think a great idea, starting point for your listeners is understanding first, how do you pick strong jurisdictions? And then what's the weakness of domestic versus offshore? How do you decide? What do you do? When do you want to make that leap? And we can kind of walk through that step, that process if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Let's chat about that a little bit, because I think that's becoming more and more popular. The concept of holding properties in trusts, especially, we're definitely seeing that associated with like an older population, and they're maybe planning to hand the property over to their children or something.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't say you put the property in a revocable living trust thinking you're going to get any protection. Those are separate. One's for, avoiding probate and death taxes. Another one, asset protection. Trusts are a separate entity, and that actually protects your assets. So let's just jump into it. So I would prefer first clients use exemption planning, which we can jump into later on, and we start there for a reason. But then after that, picking a jurisdiction to establish your trust in is the next really big issue. And what jurisdiction means is that the laws and the rules that govern you and trust and business entities are going to differ from one state to another, and it's even going to vary from one country to another. And so your listeners actually have two options when they're picking asset protection trusts. They can either create them domestically in the US, like in Nevada, or they can set them up offshores in another country like the Cook Islands. Mm-hmm. I prefer the power of going offshore, and if and when it's ever needed. And the reason for it is just because they have what's called statutory non-recognition in the Cook Islands of any other country's court orders. And so what this means is that a U.S. judgment is completely worthless in the Cook Islands. They'd have to start their case all over from scratch, facing the highest legal standard in the world, the murdered standard. They'd have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. If they lose, they pay. And so the likelihood of them winning when you got to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt is very little. It's a small percentage. And they have to front all the court costs, flying a judge from New Zealand. So it's really impractical to actually get into court in the Cook Islands. And the statute of limitations there is only 1 year. So by the time they realize that's where they need to be, they probably already missed their chance at swinging at the ball to sue you there. But there's always pros and cons to everything. And so to be purely foreign, I mean, it's 5 out of 5 stars on effectiveness, statutory non-recognition. Like it doesn't get much stronger than that. But on the other 3 factors that your listeners should be looking at, control, cost, and compliance, it's going to fall a little bit short. And so the reason that falls short is just for a foreign asset protection trust to work, you got to be out of control and subject to a foreign trustee. The annual maintenance is going to be a lot higher. I've seen it up to $5,000 to $10,000 a year to maintain. And if you're purely foreign, you now have a lot of IRS reporting disclosures that you have to do. So it takes away anonymity. But that's only for about 5% of our clients that I would ever recommend going offshore for. That's generally overkill for most people.
Sure.
Yeah. And if we want to compare it domestically, though, because then you got this other domestic option, it's going to be less expensive and the costs are going to be easier to maintain, but they're going to fall short on effectiveness. And they fail on effectiveness because of just a foundation of asset protection. The foundation for asset protection is to not recognize another jurisdictional court orders. But then you have the hallmark of the U.S. legal system is the Constitution, and we have the full faith and credit clause, meaning, like every state has to give full faith and credit to other court orders and judgments. And you're actually starting to see a lot of domestic case law come down now that's actually piercing domestic asset protection trust. For example, we have like In re Hubbard in 2013, Dale versus Dale 2015, and Tawney versus Wacker 2018. So you're seeing recent case law now coming down, weakening domestic trust. So when you're comparing the two, your listeners are going to sit there, okay, great, I have this really expensive, powerful offshore option, or I have this, I'm not sure what I'm going to get, domestic option. What do I do? And so I would say you really don't need to do either. We use what's called a bridge trust, and there's other firms that have them out there. And it's just a hybrid of a domestic and a foreign asset protection trust. And so what you're doing is combining the best of both worlds. It was created 30 years ago. We just personally use the word bridge because it's an easy concept to demonstrate how you're using a foreign trust and a domestic trust and connecting the two countries together. And you just cross the bridge over to the, for example, the Cook Islands, if and when you ever need it when you're under attack. And then when the attack is over, the assets transfer back. Mm-hmm. And so for your CPAs and, like the lawyer listeners out there who really like to geek out on some of this, the bridge trust is a grantor trust. And so what a grantor trust means is that you, the person that created it, retains some of the power in it. And then like all asset protection trusts, they're self-settled spendthrift trust. And so what this means is that it's self-settled, meaning by you, for yourself, as your own beneficiary. And so the win-win of using this bridge system and the way it adds value is that for the purposes of IRS reporting and disclosures, that bridge trust is actually going to be considered domestic, not foreign. And this is because it's specifically granted to meet USC section 7701, which is called the court test and the control test. And the reason this is important is for tax purposes. What it means is that you don't have any of those IRS filings or asset disclosures of any kind. It's going to be cheaper for you on cost and annual maintenance. But for protection purposes, you now have the power and strength of the Cook Islands in your back pocket if and when you ever need it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It sounds like, so your company basically, like you set up all of this. I mean, there's a lot of balls in the air associated with this. So your company pretty much focuses on this, gets it all set up, and then even helps with some of the management of that? Correct.
So we would create the trust. And then we have and work with third-party administrators. And then the third-party administrator works with all of your annual compliance, making sure, everything is up to date. And even our third-party administrators that we use go to another extent and almost act as a checks and balance system to making sure all of your tax benefits and credits were picked up. So you're actually adding value, generally tens and thousands of dollars a year, just on missed tax credits and benefits, as well as making sure if you do invest, you're going to call in and say, hey, I want to buy this or I want to sell that. We make sure that you're taking the right money out of the correct bucket to maximize, your taxes and your protections, or whatever you buy, we may have to then recharacterize into a different form, keeping it out of your personal name and into the trust or into the right bucket, just to maximize your value. And so that's the power of working with a team and not just trying to do all of this yourself. Make sure it's all done legally correct, and then also try to maximize your value of your investment every year.
You've brought this up a couple times now regarding the tax benefits. Like, can you go into some of that a little bit? Like, what type of tax benefits does a person typically see?
Well, we work with your CPAs, and it's just making sure that all of the tax benefits and credits that an investor can get are going to be maximized. And that's the power, the benefit of working with trust administrators. It's a checks and balance system on your investing. So I'd say you're going to have a CPA that does that. I create the legal trust. Then we bring in your CPA and say, okay, this is tax neutral. And we kind of work with them through there. Asset protection is first and foremost tax neutral. You're not designing it to avoid taxes, because then that's tax fraud. But it doesn't mean you just can't, you don't get tax benefits out of it by just using the system itself. Mm-hmm. Sort of like using an LLC or corporate forms. By getting something out of your personal name, you're going to be taxed differently. And so that's what you're doing, is just changing the way the IRS views you as an individual versus as a corporation or as a grantor trust. And when you change your facts, you change the way that the IRS sees you, and then how your money's split up.
Sure. So, based on all of that, I usually ask, and I hate to cut this conversation short because I think you and I could chat for quite a long time. Is there anything else that we should be covering here that I haven't asked about up until now?
Yeah, I think two big topics that we should, just to help your listeners understand, is just, where does insurance fall into this, and how does it create a false sense of security?
Sure.
And what is an exemption? Because exemptions, most people don't even know about, and those are legal rights.
Sure.
And so I think a good one, let's start with insurance, because it's a really hot topic and one that I think most people have the misconception about.
Right.
And so insurance is a great place to start. I recommend everybody to get insurance as much as they can, even umbrella policies. But I see that this creates a false sense of security, thinking that, hey, if I ever do get sued, I can just solely rely on my insurance to cover me for any damages. And this just isn't true. It's not the case. You need to read your insurance policy. You need to read the fine print. And anybody that I always ask, if I go do live seminars, raise your hand if you read the fine print of your insurance policy. I don't see one hand that ever goes up. No one does. Mm-hmm. Most people can't even say what their claim limit is and what's not covered in their insurance policy.
Right.
Yeah. So a good place to start is just understand, first, real estate law is the most heavily litigated area of law. There's just a lot of ways for you to get sued. And it's really just a matter of when and in what condition you're going to be in to defend yourself, and to get lawsuits and people to the negotiating table very fast, and to settle claims that come up for pennies on the dollar, even if that, because sometimes you can just get them to go away completely. And so just keep in mind that insurance companies don't cover you for fraud, punitive damages, or intentional wrongdoings, and they're not going to pay claims that are the direct result of unlawful acts. And that's how this game gets played through litigation. Is you get sued, you're going to have sent an email or something in the past, and anything you've ever written or said is now going to be deemed an intentional act by the court. And so what your insurance company is going to do is say, hey, you made a statement. These are now intentional acts. We don't cover you for any intentional wrongdoings or intentional acts. And if you think we're wrong and not covering you, go ahead and sue us. Good luck. Mm-hmm. And that's how insurance defense works. And that's how they build out wiggle room through intentional wrongdoings. And so, and again, insurance helps. It's just not good enough. The next thing you need is an asset protection system. And one of them is, like we were talking about, trust, and either going domestic or foreign, and where that fits in with you, the listener. Domestic will be cheaper. Foreign will start about $30,000. It just depends on the need of the client and matching what the need is and where they are. And then another great option, one that I favor and always start with, is just exemptions. And so if you want to break down some exemptions, we can do that.
Sure. Let's go for it.
Yeah. So the reason I start with exemptions and consider it the staple besides jurisdiction is just because Exemptions are legal rights, and they're going to vary state by state, but they're rights under the law. Mm-hmm. And so a good example of an exemption, I'll go over a couple, is, for example, Florida homestead exemptions. In Florida, your home that you reside in, no matter how much it costs, is fully protected 100% from creditors and lawsuits, so long as it's contained within 1/4 of an acre. And I think most real estate investors, or most people in general, understand homestead. So it's a good place to understand the basic concept of it. And also, I'm sure you have a lot of California listeners, and the great thing for them is that they live in the only state that actually grants full exemption protection for any assets that qualify to be placed in what's called a private retirement plan. And this was codified under CCP section 704.115 way back in the 70s. So it's been around for over 40 years. And it has 40 plus years of really favorable case law by the Ninth Circuit Court. And they really like these exemption plannings, but just most people don't even know they exist. So that's why I actually like to break these, this specific one down.
Sure.
When you talk about, an ability to add value just with exemption planning, for example, for the last 24 months, by using just this PRP, we've been able to protect over $600 million in assets and saved over $45 million in taxes by working with the trust administrators, like we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the add value and return on investment. Like, you're getting protection, plus you're also adding missing dollars to your pocket that you can invest in. And one of the nice things about exemption planning is that once an asset qualifies to be exempt, there's nothing crazy or elaborate that really needs to be done to protect it. It's just exempt. Mm-hmm. And because it's tax neutral, you can actually invest in anything that you want. And we can protect a lot. We can protect cash, real estate, portfolios, life insurance, corporate stock, LLC interest. So there's a lot that we can do with these exemption plannings. And then for your real estate listeners who need to live off of cash flow, we can actually create a PRP funding plan that gives you the distributions you need to make your lifestyle, because these aren't regulated by ERISA, the government. There are state-specific exemptions. And so there's no 59.5 age limit for distribution. So just a matter of, need-based. Sure. And then the other beautiful thing about exemption planning, and that's really overlooked by most firms don't even know that this is a possibility, is you can actually protect the future value of an asset. And what this means is that businesses, and especially real estate, all have future value. For real estate, you're not going to buy a property today and sell it for the same price 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And so we can actually protect the value that hasn't been earned yet. And so that's a big missing point that I think a lot of listeners and people don't realize is it's not just a matter of protecting what you have now. We can protect the future unrealized value.
That's a really big one. And I got to be very selfish on this now.
Yeah.
You gave me an example of California exception, for example. So weirdly enough, I shouldn't say weirdly enough, it kind of makes a lot of sense because we lead a couple real estate meetups here locally. So a lot of our listeners are in Minnesota and North Dakota. Do you have any exception examples there that we should probably...
Not off the top of my head.
I know I had to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I jump into like the basic one of Florida because I think everybody kind of understands what, start with the homestead. And then there's so many, California is a messed up state. It's rated like the number one litigious hellhole in the, for I don't know how many years running. And then no one even knows that this exists in California. So I just trying to break down population wise and need based.
No, completely. I knew I was putting you on the spot, and I can't imagine.
But in our metrics, we have every state. We don't just do once.
Right.
In our metrics, when they call in or they would fill out the diagnostic, we have all the exemptions that come in state by state, and so you don't need to work. Yeah.
No, I understand that, and like I said, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, don't worry.
So, there is obviously so much information and exceptions by state and trusts by state and whether you want to be onshore or offshore. And you obviously are the expert in this field. Where do they find you if they want more information?
You broke up on that last question.
Where would people find you if they want more information on all this?
Yeah, so they can jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. I have tons of educational information on there and videos that they can watch. We have a free diagnostic on our website that they go in, fill out. It takes about 5 minutes. And I even do consultations for free based off the diagnostic. I just would rather, we used to charge for it. I would just rather people fill out the diagnostic, let's talk, and you take the educational viewpoint, do what you want with it. I'd rather people call and get the information than not and try to wing it on their own.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll definitely make sure that we include all of those links in the show notes.
Okay.
But I really appreciate your time today. And it was a great conversation. There is so much. I felt like we could probably have gone for hours if
it's a
the amount
big
of detail.
topic.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. And once again, this is a perfect example. You can either spend 10,000 hours in becoming expert in this, or you hire somebody like Brian who already has put in that time and effort. So thank you so much again, Brian. And hopefully we can talk again sometime in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on, and you have a great Sunday.
Yeah, you too. We've put a lot of effort into providing useful content, and if you found value in the show and have any interest in supporting us with a small donation, head over to patreon.com/housedudes.
And if you have any thoughts or questions, shoot us an email at info@housedudes.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @housedudes. And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other investors out there find the show.
And remember, massive positive impact requires
massive positive action. We'll see you next time. This episode was brought to you by HouseDudes.com. Do you have time to actively manage flipping and rentals yourself? If so, go for it. If you live in a market that won't cash flow or don't have the time to do all the work, are you just out of luck? If there was a way to participate more passively, would that appeal to you? I'm sure you have questions about how the process works and what to do next. If that's the case, fill out the form on housedudes.com/investors, and we'll reach out to see if you are a good fit for our business. This is first come, first serve, and we will have to stop taking applications when our goals are met. See you at housedudes.com/investors.
I don't like to tell a man what to do with his money, but if you ain't investing in property, then you're dumber than a dummy.
I'm not dumb. I'm smart.
Well, buy property. That's my advice.